lotniczej w Polsce, do czego oczywiście potrzebujemy i technologii, i sił amerykańskich. Jest paradoksem, że od 20 lat nie możemy wypracować systemu tankowania w powietrzu nad terytorium Polski dla maszyn amerykańskich. Szczerze mówiąc, o tym się chyba kontrwywiad powinien zająć, kto i z jakiego powodu aż tyle czasu nad tym pracuje. Więc niektóre rzeczy są dosyć proste, nie są jakoś wybitnie kosztowne, ale trzeba je koniecznie zrobić. Po to właśnie, żeby zlikwidować pokusy. Russia should not be tempted. A słabość jest pokusą. Dlatego też w tym wymiarze rzeczywistym, właśnie nie chodzi tutaj pewnie o trening żołnierzy polskich do patrolowania gór w Afganistanie albo dróg w Iraku, bo tego typu umiejętności i sprzęt nie bardzo się przydadzą przy zatrzymaniu rosyjskich kolumn pancernych, ale do stworzenia systemu wiarygodnej obrony przeciwlotniczej i przeciwrakietowej. W tym zakresie inwestycje technologiczne czy rozmieszczenie jednostek amerykańskich w Polsce znakomicie uspokajałoby sytuację i trzeba tę operację przeprowadzić, mając świadomość, że będzie ona konieczna do połączenia z potężną operacją osłony propagandowej, ponieważ atak propagandowy i rosyjski, zapewne niemiecki, francuski i części także mediów w Polsce będzie na to bardzo potężny.
Yes, I have a question about NATO as an organization, but it will also connect Poland and Europe's future. As I was mentioned before, NATO was created in 1949 because of the Cold War. So it was used for United States political aspirations in Europe. And nowadays, slowly and slowly, you have countries which have different aspiration, political aspiration. For instance, you got the United Kingdom and France going to attack Libya because they had economic interests in the, and obviously Russians lost the money in Libya, which they weren't totally happy. But my question is America going to keep the leadership in NATO in the future? Because it's very important for the European region, which America at the moment, Barack Obama administration is taking out troops. And it will be difficult to say to the German leader, to the United Kingdom leader, to, for instance, use the force in far East.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you think that in future NATO won't be so it won't be such a powerful institution as it was in 1949, and it won't be let's say it won't be a political weapon of America anymore, and you might have a situation that, for instance, Poland will help Georgia, and the Americans will back down. And my question is, will America keep the strength as a leader of NATO, or will countries like Germany will start leading, especially in Europe, and then maybe later in NATO, and maybe, just maybe, the Americans might go out of NATO? But that's
Right.
just some questions.
Well, it's very, I mean, really the question is, what's America's role in NATO in the
Yes,
future, and where do we see it? America has no intention to abandon NATO, right? I mean, our thought is more NATO is better than less NATO, and we are committed to shaping NATO in the future so that it is relevant, so that it remains relevant, and it remains a vibrant organization. It will be interesting to see what the dynamic will look like as the U.S., and when we say, you know, as the U.S. draws down in Europe, that the U.S. isn't going away from it, right? I mean, the U.S. is simply repositioning forces. And the truth be told is those are forces that haven't been in Europe for 10 years, right? Those forces have always been in Iraq or Afghanistan. They've never been in Europe.
Oh, in Germany.
Yeah, but they haven't been in Germany. They've been in the actual number of forces, once the Afghanistan operation winds down, of U.S. forces that will be in Europe, like actually physically in Europe, will be the same as it's been for a decade. What happens is, There is, on paper, there are more forces assigned to Europe right now, but those forces have always been in Iraq or Afghanistan. So the reality is, right, I mean, those forces are just not going to return to Europe, they're going to return to the US. And so the numbers of forces that we have in Europe remain the same, although in paper. Does that make sense? I mean, so we have a number of brigades, combat brigades, that are in Afghanistan, but on paper they're assigned to Europe. They're European forces. They're US forces in Europe, but they happen to be in Afghanistan or Iraq. It's been like that for a decade. So what's going to happen is those forces are simply just never going to come back to Europe. They're going to go, actually they're just going to disappear. I think they just disappear over the Atlantic somewhere and they cease to exist. So the US isn't withdrawing from Europe. It's simply resizing and reshaping what we have here. The interesting thing will be to see what is the reaction, particularly of European powers, Germany, France, and the UK, to that move by the US. You know, it's interesting, especially with Germany, because your foreign minister seems to be a very big fan of Germany, and would encourage more German involvement instead of less German involvement. Now, from the US perspective, I don't know that we think that's a bad thing or a good thing. I don't think we really, look, I think we're kind of agnostic on that, you know? But I think there's an important role that the United States plays as a leader in NATO. I think it's a different perspective than what you get in Europe, and I think that's healthy. Much like I think the European involvement in NATO, from the US perspective, giving us perspective on things other places in the world is healthy. I think that's healthy, and I would hope that that doesn't go away, right? But when it comes to, you know, what influence will the U.S. as we pivot toward Asia Pacific, you know, again, it goes back to what will be our expectation of NATO there. I don't think it's much of an expectation at all as far as resources are concerned. I think political will, yes, and that we continue to use NATO as a mechanism for good, we'll say, you know, as a mechanism for good around the world. I don't anticipate the U.S. will ever not be, you know, I don't want to say the leader of NATO, because NATO really is an alliance, and the U.S., while it maintains a very large role, is always one to talk about the alliance. And when you look at the Secretary General, you know, never been an American, you know, it really is an international organization. What the U.S. thinks when we look at NATO right now is, of the defense spending within NATO, right, the percentage of the defense spending that accounts for the U.S. is 75%. So of the 100% that NATO spends on defense-related spending, and this is within NATO itself, it's not all the U.S. spending, but within NATO itself, the U.S. pays 75% of that, and Europe pays 25%. Now, 20 years ago, it was like 50-50, and the U.S. would like to get more back to the 50-50. But I can tell you that as long as the U.S. is shouldering 75% of the burden, the U.S. will maintain an active role within the alliance as a leader, because we feel like, you know, we're committing 75% of the resources. We should have the biggest seat at that table. But that being the case, the U.S. was more than willing, especially when we're talking about the Libya operation, to take a backseat role to the extent that we could. I think the U.S. would have loved to take an even lesser role in the Libya operation than we did, but circumstances, because of capabilities, demanded that more U.S. involvement in certain areas where we didn't want to be involved. You know, I mean, I think we were perfectly content to let the French and the Brits take on the lion's share of that operation. But for intelligence and surveillance and reconnaissance, refueling issues, I mean, targeting, those kinds of capabilities, it just revealed that NATO didn't have it, and so the U.S. provided that. But I think we're comfortable with not being in the lead on every issue, but we're not in a position where we are going to step back and say, you know, we won't lead in the alliance. That's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. You know, but you know, a lot of that depends on the future. What about the rest of Europe? You know, is the rest of Europe committed to NATO, and are they committed to, you know, and that's sort of a question. I think the U.S. is committed and sees the value and will continue to see the value. And I think as one of the leaders on the strategic planning for the future, trying to see where it's valued, you know. But those are big questions about what NATO's role should be in the world, and Poland in particular when it comes to NATO's role in the world. Poland is concerned first and foremost with Article 5, to make sure that Article 5 is enforced, and that Poland, as a member of NATO, just like every other member of NATO, is covered in this collective defense, common defense shield, right? And I totally understand that. But, you know, Poland is, President Komorowski, Professor Koje, Foreign Minister, Defense Minister have all talked about, you know, Poland will be less likely in the future to want to engage in out-of-area operations and in operations that don't directly impact Poland's national interests, right? And that's when you're talking about Afghanistan, right? And the argument that that nations such as Russia that actually have an interest in Afghanistan should be paying for Afghanistan after 2014, and not nations like Poland that really don't have an interest in Afghanistan. Great, that's a great argument. And I buy along with that. But you know, in the international community, and particularly within the alliance, you realize the alliance is an alliance of countries that aren't only looking after their national interests. They're not, right? I mean, at its fundamental core, it's common defense, and so we all have each other's back. But you know, a lot of the things that we talk about, U.S. Mihaw's question was interesting. You know, the U.S. support for Poland. Well, one of the reasons the U.S. wouldn't do that is because, one, we know Poland's capable, but two, it gets to, you know, fundamental national interests. And this is, do we have a national interest in putting $250 million a year to support your military? Probably not. And why don't we? Well, we've got interests in a lot of places in the world. Does Poland have an interest in Afghanistan? Probably not. But Poland does have an interest in the alliance, and the alliance being strong. And so does that mean that Poland should play along with the alliance when the alliance is going to do something as a show of solidarity? Yeah, I think that's true. And it's not a critique of Poland, because everything that's ever been asked of Poland, Poland has done. Poland has been a great ally. But when we get to the Libya operation, and you see that that's the outlier, that's the one time Poland didn't do it, and you look at, you know, what are the costs associated with not participating? It's very easy to say it's not in our national interest to do something, so we're not going to do it. But then to rely on others to do things that are in your national interest that may not be in their national interest, that becomes the question, right? And so, you know, the U.S. has, particularly with Libya, our position was, look, Poland can do what Poland wants to do. Poland, if they would like to participate, we'd like that. If not, that's okay. Poland's in Afghanistan. Honestly, when the Libya operation went on, all we were concerned about is 2,500 troops in Afghanistan. So we didn't press on Libya. Would we press the next time there was something? I don't know. Maybe. Depends on what that something was. You know? But that's the question that every country in the alliance has to say. It may not be in our national interest to do something in Syria. I mean, NATO's not going to do something in Syria, I don't think. But let's use Syria as an example. You know, it may not be in Portugal's national interest to intervene in Syria. But Portugal certainly has an interest in the alliance being strong. And if the alliance chooses to do something in Syria, should Portugal go along with that? Because it's a member of the alliance, and it needs to support it every year. I mean, that's the question, right? So, I mean, get back to your fundamental question. I think the U.S. will continue to be a leader. The U.S. sees a future for NATO. The U.S. does not see Europe without NATO. That isn't anything on the horizon. We see NATO as being vital to the security of Europe. And as being, honestly, it's a good deal for everyone. All members of NATO, the 28 members, get more security from their relationship with NATO than they get into it. And that's a deal for everyone. So we're supporting it.
Well, yeah, if I can add something. First, we have to realize that the old good times when eastern part of Germany were occupied by the Soviet Union and Soviet tanks were 400 miles away from Paris will never come back. I hope so. So, there is no reason for Germany and France to be as good NATO members as they used to be.
Right.
They share Russian perspective of multipolar world and not unipolar world with the supremacy of the United States. So Polish problem is that two largest continental NATO member states, in fact, are not fundamentally interested in American leadership in NATO. They are interested in reducing of American leadership in NATO. We should add to that the cultural, traditional roots of Franco-Russian and German-Russian relations. In that sense, the golden age of the Third Republic of France was the Franco-Russian alliance, and the golden age of the Second Reich was the times of Bismarck and Gorchakov. That means the European concerto of the great powers without Central Europe. Poland was not existing. There is a legend of the German on the Kremlin throne. There was Sofia Anhalt-Zerbst as Catherine II, Holstein-Gottorp Romanov dynasty. And now we have fluently speaking German President Putin, and a few years ago we have Vice Prime Minister for Economy German Greif, who was German descendant as well. So this, it's not true, but this is an image in the mind of too large part of German political class, that there is a huge German cultural influence of the present governors of Kremlin, and their common interest to reduce American domination in NATO. So Central Europe, which is interested in American leadership, if cooperates with the United States, is confronted not only with Russia, but as well with Germany and France, at least from time to time. This is why we are called American triumph donkey or horse in Europe, if we cooperate with the United States in more close way. So that's a problem. The problem is that Polish public opinion will be confronted with political propaganda pressure, not only from the East, but as well from the West, from Europe, which could be much more effective. If I asked whether Poland in 2003 supported American or European attitude towards Europe, the answer would be European, while there was no European position at the time. Poland supported the majority of European states, and not the minority. Franco-German camp was minority camp, but it claimed to be European, and was in propaganda terms was successful. They were believed to be Europeans. We not. However, we were in the majority of European states that supported the United States at the time. So, of course, that's the problem of American leadership in NATO. I think in the cold times model, it's over, because two main continental states are not interested in that, and have good reasons from very point of view. They are not threatened anymore. If half of Germany is occupied, if Paris is still threatened, they will be as close allies as we want to be. But that's over. And the problem is that even in 90s, not fundamental interests, but secondary interests, still vital, that were threatened by Yugoslavian wars. Namely, a huge amount of refugees were storming European borders asking for asylum. Yeah? That's over. It was proved that neither German, neither French, nor Italian forces are able to pacify situation in the Balkans. Americans were needed. But this source of troubles, hopefully, is out of question today. So, in fact, there are less and less common interests in the strategic level. And that's the problem. And of course, we can make jokes about Russian threat from American perspective is unreal. From Polish, it's real. We can reverse the situation. Well, Muslim threat for whom? Right. For Russia. Very Absolutely. Good. Let's support Muslims.
Right.
Yeah? Well, this is the situation that exists in this perception of threats. And the problem is to what an extent we can count on our allies, not on even goodwill declarations of the governments. Because what we should have in mind is the massive 2 million people demonstrated in Germany in 1991 against war to liberate Kuwait. Quite clear, morally quite clear task. While 2 million Germans protested against that in 1991, simultaneously being blind on Russian and Soviet interference in Vilnius, where people were killed by tanks. Yeah? This was Gorby mania, and Russia was splendid, yeah, under democratic leadership of Gorbachev, for Germans, of course. While American imperialists were bombing Iraq and liberating Kuwait for oil. That was the image which is appealing for public opinion. And it is, of course, against Polish interests, but it exists. So the problem is how to deal between two main European powers that are interested in reducing American domination in NATO and are ready to cooperate with Russia, the aim of Russia is to create a multipolar world, and in fact European concerta of Moscow, like in the 19th century. Russia is not going to dominate Europe, but is going to be accepted as one of a few great powers, together with Germany, France, and maybe Britain. That's all. And of course, close cooperation of Central Europe with the United States is an instrument disturbing this plan, and this is why it is fight back by our allies from Europe and by Russia. To understand this situation is crucial for Polish public opinion, because the most important problem for Poles, for my compatriots, is to accept the costs of political quarrels with all those big three. Even if you are allied with the United States, which that's true under Obama presidency, for example, still the problem is how to be mentally strong enough to accept that we are in quarrel. It's not war, of course, but we are in quarrel, or we should be in quarrel with Germany or France, with Russia, if necessary. And that not means that we are blindly pro-American. For example, this support for New Start, or for shrinking Israeli borders, or for withdrawal tactical weapons from Europe. This is blindly pro-American position, and not supporting Iraqi war or sometimes Afghanistan operation, or Georgian policy or Ukrainian policy of the United States. And Poland was attacked also internally by some part of Polish commentators for that policy. So that's the problem for us, how to attract American interest to Eastern Europe, which is not the priority of the United States, and how to sustain our policy vis-à-vis our partners in Europe, sometimes even against the United States, because, for example, it was a stupid policy to recognize Kosovo, because nothing depends on Polish recognition, but that was creating the instrument for Russian propaganda against Georgia and Ukraine, who asked Poland not to recognize Kosovo. Privately, I'm completely in favor of the independence of Kosovo, because the Kosovoan people have the right to be independent. But if I were to plan Polish foreign policy, that was wrong solution to support American position and not Ukrainian and Georgian position at this point. So sometimes we should demonstrate our independent policy from the United States wishes, if it is in our national interests. But the overwhelming majority of interests are common, and without cooperation with the United States, we are not able to pursue our strategic interest, which lies in Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, Moldavia, and so on, and not, of course, in Afghanistan. And one more sentence. Syria. Okay, Syria is a Russian ally. Let's attack it. we can support it, at least morally.
But
We may
Turkey,
not have it.
Turkey is talking about using Article 5 against
No.
Syria.
Right.
Turkey is our potential ally in Caucasus, in Ukraine, generally vis-à-vis Russia. Not that good as it used to be in 90s. Still, Turks are not naive. They have long experience with Russia. They play the game with it. Now, not in the way favorable for us, but they are not naive. Germans and French sometimes are naive. Now think about Spaniards or Italians. I remember Zapatero visiting Kaliningrad just when he turned Spanish alliances, yeah, from United States to Germany and France, and he was invited for a summit in Kaliningrad region. Of course, Spain had strategic interest in Kaliningrad region. Poland was not invited in that summit. So we were joking that it is like to create a summit over Ceuta and Melilla, general Moroccan politics, with Poland, France and Morocco without Spain. So that was the pattern. So sometimes we must have moral and political power to say no to the United States, but generally that's the most important ally in our necessary confrontation with Russia, Germany and France, whose main strategic priorities are contrary to ours.
Frankly speaking, I'm a little bit disappointed by this discussion because we are concentrated on the conventional threats. I think that we are like generals who are thinking about how to win the last war. I think that what we should do, what NATO should do to be relevant, as you said. We have common threats: Germans, France, Poland, America as well. This is a cyber terrorist, cyber attack. The Estonian example is the best possible. Yeah. I also remember the press conference after the meeting of Chancellor Merkel with Chinese Prime Minister Wen Jiabao, when Merkel openly said that day by day Germans are under attack by cyber terrorists, probably from China. Yeah. Yeah? Of course, Prime Minister Wen Jiabao said that this is not true. Yeah, but probably it is. Yeah, and talking about possible scenarios, the worst possible scenario for Poland is a cyber attack from Russia, not aircraft attack. It's not possible, but cyber attack it is. And I think that NATO should do more in this area.
Your point is exactly well taken. If you look at the strategic concept from 2010, where it lays out for NATO's future, here are the threats that we will build the alliance to protect against. Cyber is the first thing on there, second thing on there maybe. I mean, and NATO is building up capabilities for cyber defense. The thing about cyber defense is you don't talk real politics when you talk cyber defense, right? Because you're really not defending, unless you want to talk about the Chinese or Russians, in that sort of a government-sponsored cyber attack.
On a big scale.
On a big scale. No, and absolutely that could happen. But the issues remain the same, though. Who's the threat, right? I mean, and is the threat Russia, or is the threat not Russia? Is the threat China? But NATO's focused on cyber. I mean, the thing about cyber is it's not visible. Cyber is not visible like troops on the ground and aircraft and missiles. It's a different level of capability. And the U.S. is incredibly, I mean, the tens of thousands of people that work in the U.S. on cyber defense of critical cyber functions, it blows your mind how many people we're talking about. Huge investment. But most of that is not in the news. So